have questions, to place them in the chat. Welcome to our latest webinar to support the 2022 Social Studies Standards. Today, we're going to unveil our instructional bank. We're so excited of instructional strategies for social studies. We're going to do a deep dive through our high leverage strategies and protocols. Hello, everyone. We're just going to reintroduce you to the social studies team, our fearless leader and content manager, Sean Diamond. Our other social studies content specialist, Samantha Chason, and myself, Chandra Phillips. First of all, we want to start the ground, maybe rather just connect these course frameworks to our overall vision for social studies in Louisiana. First, our goal is to graduate students who have a broad and deep knowledge about the world, are able to express reason and nuanced arguments, and are prepared to participate in civic life. If we start to get real about that vision that you see before you, it means that students are going to need a broad and deepening knowledge of U.S. and world history, a firm grasp and appreciation for the civic principles that underlie our systems of government, a solid understanding of the fundamental economic principles, and the ability to make wise financial decisions, and finally, proficiency in both physical and human geography. This graphic illustrates what we think is the best approach to achieve these goals. In the instructional process, we always let you know that we first must, in social studies, set the context, meaning that we introduce key terms, make connections, explore sources, whether that be through examine or building students' content, knowledge, and skills. We want then for students to be able to develop claims where they know how to evaluate evidence and make compare and contrast of sources. Finally, we want students to be able to express claims, whether that be through their writing or through their expression of words, to help support those claims with evidence. This session, again, is going to cover a few instructional strategies to help teachers plan and align lessons. Okay, so here are our objectives. By the end of this session, you should be able to articulate the purpose of how to use the new social studies instructional strategies bank, and discern when and how to use strategies for contextualizing, sourcing, and claims testing. Our agenda for today, we begin with an overview of the Louisiana Social Studies Instructional Strategies Bank. Okay, so what is this strategies bank we've been talking about, all right, and we're so excited about? Well, the what? The bank is a strategies or protocols of social studies classrooms. Why? Why do we need this? To assist teachers with implementing best practices in social studies education and to help them plan lessons to align with our new 2022 Louisiana Social Studies Standards. When? Well, we're so excited. The first 3 strategies are available today, with the remainder will be published prior to the 2023 Louisiana Teacher Leaders Summit. Where can you find these strategies? In the Louisiana Believers K-12 Social Studies page. These strategies will cover a variety of topics. Here are some of the strategies we have planned for the bank. The 3 we will present on today are bolded, but as you can see, they will address all different parts of instructional process. We've looked at earlier, and a list if the list is not exhaustive. Now let's talk about the format of the strategies. The format of the strategies will consist of a 1-pager. And at the top, at the right-hand corner, you will see the title of the strategy or protocol. Then you will see under the basics, the what, when, and why, for teachers to understand how this resource should be utilized. Next, how to implement. You will have a step-by-step instruction of how to implement this strategy in the classroom. Finally, we provide you with additional resources to go along with the strategy, like handouts and posters, research and understanding behind the strategy, model videos for teachers to watch to see how and to understand the use of the strategy, and various examples for various grade bands such as 3, 5, 6, 8, and 9, 12. Next on our agenda, we will talk about the strategy the strategy that we have for contextualization. And my manager, Sean, will tell you more about that.
All right, thank you so much. All right, so like Chandra said, the first strategy we're going to be talking about today is one for contextualization. All right, so let me just step back here and contextualization. This is a pretty big $5 word, but contextualize just means to think about the circumstances that form the setting really for an event, an idea, or some text. And we want to understand those circumstances if we're going to have any chance of fully understanding that idea, that text, that particular specific event here. Oftentimes, I think we tend to project our own kind of idiosyncrasies, our present ideas kind of back onto the past, and certainly students do that as well. And all of our historical understanding kind of suffers for it. So we think that this protocol helps us all think about context, so we can kind of break out of that presentism, and by that we just mean kind of an inclination to imagine that the way things are now is the way things always were, that students can sometimes slide back into. So again, overall, we think that context is helpful for students to recognize that while documents might express or speak to some universal theme or reoccurring pattern in history, and that's awesome for them to see that, but also that they're always a product of some particular point in time. Okay, so the what, when, and why for this protocol. So what? So again, this is, I think I've just explained this, but this is a protocol to help students contextualize various sources or particular events. When? So when to do this? It makes sense in a lot of times, honestly, but probably the best is when you're introducing some new unit or topic, right? So prior to doing any kind of real in-depth primary source analysis, you would want to set the context broadly, and I think this protocol works best there. Why? I think I spoke to that. We want them to be able to assess the significance of something and not, both under or overplay it. And I think this protocol helps with that. Okay, so we're going to use an example from our forthcoming frameworks, the new social studies course frameworks, which we've been talking about for a while now. I'll just preempt potential questions at the end of this webinar. Yes, we are going to release the first two units in those at the end of this month, and then the remainder prior to Teacher Leader Summit. But back to this here. So here's a example from grade 6, unit 3, topic 1, which covers French colonial Louisiana. All right, so let's imagine we've introduced the framing question, the kind of big investigation that they're going to go on for a few weeks. We've kind of introduced that to them. Now we're starting with this first very concrete supporting question. When and how did French settlements in Louisiana begin? Right. This here is an excellent opportunity to do this contextualization protocol. Why? We're about to introduce a really new major event. We're going to be doing an in-depth look at a particular primary source related to this event. This is going to be a good time to remind students of what they've learned prior and to make some connections to their own lives today. So let's look at the protocol itself here. All right, so this is actually an example graphic organizer we link in the protocol that kind of goes through what you're going to be asking the students to do. And I thought it would be helpful to look at this as I talk over the steps, as opposed to just looking at the steps themselves. But I think just in general, it's always best practice to have, teachers should, think through these steps themselves and answer these questions for themselves prior to having the students do so, just to make sure that you're equipping them with the knowledge they need to actually do this. So here, the first two questions at the top are generic, but they kind of focus the activity. The first question is, the students are going to write down whatever question they're trying to answer at that moment, or potentially even a claim that they would be trying to make. In this example, we're using the supporting question I just showed from the framework from grade 6 there. When and how did the first French settlements in Louisiana begin? Right, then they kind of narrow in further down on the source that they're looking at. And that's going to be a very short entry about LaSalle claiming Louisiana for France, as described by in Metaire's diary. So the first thing we're going to have students do is to try and locate this event in time. So again, on the template, we're just giving a generic line with some dashes in it, but that's for the teacher to modify and change that timeline and provide the boundaries depending on what they're having students contextualize and how deep they want them to go. So here we've just thrown some of these events that we're going to see in the text in a moment along that timeline. But the idea here is to just constantly be asking students to try and think about events before and after the thing they're kind of looking at, so they can kind of work on their chronological thinking, right? Just building that timeline lesson after lesson, and this being something that they return to seems pretty powerful to me. So after finding this particular source in this event in time, they find it in space, right? So here too, you'll see on the template we provided, there's just a generic grayscale world map, but that too should change to fit whatever you're asking the students to contextualize again. So since this is LaSalle claiming France vis-a-vis Metaire's diary, right? The students have drawn some lines again that are going to go to some of these events we're going to look at more broadly. But they've found that event in somewhere generally in the territory that would become Louisiana. They've marched New France, the Marquette and Joliet's journey. They're just locating the event in space. The idea here isn't necessarily perfect accuracy, but to build their skills with geography. All right, moving on. Again, referencing what's going to be coming in our course frameworks, right? Where would students pull some of these events and information from? Well, we've pointed to a large context setting source here. I'd like to just kind of shout out Louisiana Endowment for Humanities for their help writing original essays about Louisiana state history. So here there's one about early exploration and colonization, where they could read to just generally set the context. That's how they would know to pull in the information about Cartier's exploration, 150 years prior. And then, of course, the actual primary source that they're going to be reading here, the diary entry I mentioned earlier. And so ultimately, students are going to list out events, before and after and around that are germane and pertinent to this source they're studying. This would be an excellent opportunity for the teacher to think about what they've learned about earlier in the year and in previous years and how they can make those connections back. You'll see here, the last bullet point is talking about kind of that, the Virginia colony is growing at the same time. And this is something students would have learned about in just the previous unit, to kind of keep in mind that they're actually studying kind of parallel events here. And then finally, to tie this all together, students write a contextualization paragraph, what we're calling a contextualization paragraph. And again, they're just kind of tying in what they did, putting in writing what they've done on the timeline and in the map. But finally, adding this last piece about, how do modern day attitudes, values, and concepts differ from those at this time you're studying or this source you're studying? And so the example here might be something, right? People don't generally claim land for a king today. In fact, very few countries still have monarchies, and monarchies is misspelled there. But something like this, right? So making a connection to their own lives, their own time, and doing that, contextualization in just a real broad way. Okay, so this pretty much wraps up this contextualization strategy here. There are some examples at different grade bands provided in that template, in that one pager. And again, the template we've provided there, the map and the timeline, are meant to be edited based on the specific needs of the teacher and students in this activity, right? So depending on what you're contextualizing, those things need to change, all right? So I'm going to pass it back to my colleague here, who's going to go over a strategy for sourcing.
Okay, everyone, now we're going to talk about our second strategy, the happy strategy for sourcing. Remember, when we say sourcing involves the ability to describe, select, and evaluate relevant evidence about the past from different source or sources. These sources could include documents, art, artifacts. You may need to draw conclusions about the relevance of different historical issues. Analysis of these sources looks at the interaction between the content and the authorship, the vantage point, the purpose, the audience, and the format of the sources themselves. You can evaluate the usefulness, the reliability, and the limitations of sources as in historical evidence. So to help students with the whole process of sourcing, strategy 2 is called HAPPY. What is it? The protocol here is to help students analyze sources by thinking carefully about the origins, the audience, purpose, point of view, and the significance. When when would students use this? We want students to use this if they are going in an in-depth examination or exploration of a primary or secondary source or a set of sources. And why? It is to require students to think about the ways in which the past has been interpreted and consider the factors that influence a source's creation. Again, I think it's useful to start from the template, uh, what we are asking students to complete. First, students will fill in a few specific topics or pieces of the information about the sources. And we really feel like this is just one of the main strategies that would help students help them to come to the habits of things they need to notice for LEAP, right? Then students will move through the protocol of answering questions about sources, the context, the intended audience, the purpose and point of view, and etc. The context. So now let's look at the source that we have here. Let us again look at how this might play out in an actual classroom. In grade 4, students are going to look at a few short excerpts from the Deeds of the Divine Augustus, a list of achievements written by the emperor himself towards the end of his life. Before we would have students to read the source itself, we would definitely need to set the context, right? And kind of get them ready for this because this source may be challenging for them, right? Because it can be challenging for older students. And build a lot of content knowledge. At this point, students have been reading about Rome when they get to this point, its rise, its Punic Wars, the conflict of orders, the rise and downfall of Caesar and Augustus himself. But still, before introducing this difficult source, we would like to provide students with that content background that they would need to know. For examples, we've bolded particular vocabulary that they would definitely need to be familiar with, like the pharaohs and the Pax Romana. So these are things that we want them to kind of explore even before we even start the process of them sourcing the document. Now, as we look at this adaptation, students would read it and annotate it and discuss the document they will be sourcing. Primary sources will usually contain difficult language and syntax, even when adapted. So we have to be mindful when we provide students with these sources. You will need to ask or remind your students what the Senate is. And how real its power was at this time after Augustus became emperor. Pardon is definitely a word that you should familiarize your students with. It might be good to point out that Augustus makes the point of telling us that the citizens were unanimously in love with him, right? Why might we suspect the claim is exaggerated? So these are kind of things that you would help kind of guide your students in that pre-teaching mode right before we get into really dissecting this information. Now let's go through the questions in the Happy Sourcing Protocol and see what we could expect students to answer with teacher support. First thing we want to know is, can we place the source Historical narrative. Okay, so we do know that this was happening at the beginning of the Roman Empire. Okay, is there anything the students already know? What prior knowledge are they bringing? Augustus was the first emperor of Rome after the Republic fell. What was happening at that time that might have influenced this document's creation? They were recovering from its civil war. So these are things that we would have to do to pull out that that historical context, using this strategy. Our audience, who is the speaker talking to? Uh, he wants the people all over Roman Empire to read this document, right? He's created it and he's displayed outside his tomb, but it was also designed for building across the empire. What was the purpose? Power for at least, at this time, when this document or this particular information was written, he had been in power for at least 25 years and was getting old. Perhaps he wanted a record of his accomplishments for future generations. So what point of view is this coming from? Because we know it's important for students to understand who's telling, where the source is coming from and their perspective in history. So it's coming from our main person, Augustus, who at this time, he was a military leader. But you notice also in this point of view that he did not talk about the Republic ending or really about him being a dictator. So, so these are kind of things that the speaker of this text deliberately brought out or did not bring in. So these are kind of things we want students to explore when they look at these sources. Now the why, the significance, right? What is the main idea that we want students to pull out from this document? We're wanting them to be able to understand this, describing the honors and accomplishments and the military victories. Why is it important? This document shows highly Augustus thought of himself and the kind of image he wanted history to have. Now we will move on to claims testing, and Sean will take it from there.
All right, thanks so much. I am back. Thank you. So I just, I did want to add one thing with the happy sourcing stuff too. Again, the instructionally, that could look a lot of different ways in the class, right? It could be very appropriate to go through an entire source, as a whole class, just direct instruction mode, especially when you are introducing this as a new thing. But as students become more comfortable with it, it can, be done in groups or in pairs and eventually even individually, especially as we, move up the grade levels. So I just wanted to add that one point. All right, claims testing. So this is our third and final strategy we're going to be talking about today. This one is a bit different in that it really is going to apply to grade 6 and above. I think there are probably versions of this that could work at lower grades. But I think when you see, as I kind of get into the pieces here, why this, generally speaking, really will be a 6th grade and above strategy for students and teachers here. Okay, so what is claims testing? All right, well, it's kind of what it sounds like. It's a process by which students evaluate and test claims, right? So when this activity is best done when we've been learning about a topic for a while, right? When they've been marinating in something, they've built a whole bunch of knowledge, they've done some smaller tasks, they've done some writing, but this is when we're kind of preparing maybe for to really answer that framing topic question, either in writing or we're going to have a deliberation or debate and they're going to defend their thinking. Either way, the whole idea is to get them thinking about their own thinking, right? And so I don't want people to get hung up on these categories I'm about to show, because they can maybe sound a little scary, and students might not use them perfectly the first time, and that's fine. But the idea is, again, to have them become comfortable with examining their own thinking and trying to make their claims better. Okay, so the way this works is students are given a claim or they generate claims, or a series of them. So just statements and arguments. And then they use these 4 categories to kind of test their thinking, right? So the 4 categories are, and we're going to go through some examples in a second now, but just to tell you their names, right? So intuition, right? Kind of gut feeling, logic, authority, and evidence, right? I think we're all probably most comfortable with and feel the best about evidence, but we're going to go in the reverse order here as we go through them. All right, so let's talk about intuition here. All right, so again, we're using these claims testers to kind of test claims and ask ourselves, like, is this a good claim? Is this a good direction to go down? Or do I need to maybe adjust my thinking and make another statement or argument? All right, so this claim here is something maybe we can all relate to a little bit, but the claim is that beignets are the most popular dessert in my state, right? So in Louisiana. So intuition being a gut feeling, this is when something just kind of feels right. And thinking about this statement, I certainly love them. Most of my friends like beignets. I go to a lot of restaurants and they're usually on the menu. So I think this claim definitely could appeal to my intuition and does kind of feel right. All right. So intuition is just the vaguest, most general pass. Like, does this feel like it might make sense or not? Oftentimes our intuition can be great, but that's not where we stop here. So the next tester is logic, and this is when you think through something very carefully to see if it makes sense. And while that maybe feels like intuition, it's really not. Right. So this is very useful when claims mistake correlation for causation. So my example here is a student might come up with a claim, right? Beignets being super delicious are the most popular dessert in Louisiana, in my state. Well, it doesn't necessarily follow that because something is super delicious that it must be the most popular, right? This is a really common kind of error that younger students will make, right? A classic example is because people that play basketball are often tall, playing basketball makes you tall, right? That's the kind of correlation for causation thing that you often see in elementary and middle school students' claims. Right. The next tester is authority. Right. And this is all about whether or not a claim sometimes appeals to a certain individual or group as a authority that we should believe. So what makes a good authority or a poor authority? This can get pretty tricky pretty quickly. But generally someone that is perceived as an expert by a lot of different groups or institutions, a person who has wide experience in a given field, right? So the claim here, we'll just imagine that Sharon Nikes is a famous Louisiana pastry chef, right? So if she said that beignets are the most popular dessert, well, she has long experience in the pastry field. This might be a legitimate claim. But I think asking students to think about the authority, if they're appealing to that in a claim, is always a really good move to test and to have them improve their own arguments. All right, and then finally here, and what we're probably most familiar with is evidence, right? So evidence comes from the word evident, just means to see something. This is when the claim makes the appeal to some demonstrable fact, right? So some sort of number or some sort of number or text that would essentially prove this. So this fact that the legislature voted the beignet as the official state donut might kind of buttress this claim that beignets are the most popular dessert in the state. All right. And so again, this one would just be a way for students to begin thinking about the evidence if the claim presents some. All right, so we are going to kind of try this here. I'm going to give this example as a way that you could potentially introduce the idea of claims testing to students here. So the claim that we're going to test was once hotly debated, and then in like the 1640s, but then eventually became known as a fact. But in some circles, it's hilariously controversial again. And that claim is the Earth is round. Right? So again, my claim here is the Earth is round. So just now, again, totally imagining that students for some reason have been studying heliocentric versus geocentric versions of the solar system or universe. And they were given this claim, and you'd ask them, okay, based on what we've been learning about, let's think of a whole bunch of, statements or kind of subclaims, right, that could support this. And if you had some very, very bright students, they might come up with some statements like this, right? So everyone says the earth is round. My science teacher says the earth is round. This feels right because a lot of things I see in nature are round. I've seen so many pictures from spacecrafts that show the earth is round. Okay, I'm not gonna read them all, but a whole bunch of statements that essentially back up this claim about the earth being round. Okay, so let's now apply some different claims testers that I just showed to these statements that students would have generated. Right, and again, these are the four of them here. Intuition, just kind of your initial gut feeling. All right, like, is the reasoning logical? Right, so if it says, like, A is B and B is C is AC, kind of thing. Authority, right? If authority is referenced in the claim, does this seem like it should be a legitimate authority for the claim being given, right? That type of thing. And then evidence, is there some specific evidence? All right, so I think my colleague mentioned at the top of this presentation that if you had a cell phone or a device handy, it would be helpful, because we're going to try something here. We're going to do a quick live poll here now, and hopefully this works. If not, I do apologize. But if you can either go to this website here on the bottom left and type in this code, or you can just take a picture real quick with that QR code. I want to know, what do you all think the best claims tester, which one best matches this statement? My science teacher says that the earth is round. All right, my science teacher says that the earth is round. Which kind of tester is this mostly appealing to? Is it authority, logic, intuition, or evidence? I'm just going to give us like 30 seconds here. I apologize if people didn't have their phone present. We're going to do one or two more after this. Say like 10 more seconds. Looks like authority is in the strong lead. Logic moved up a little bit. All right, we're gonna call this one here. So yes, 94% of participants, and there's 200 people here, so that's a pretty good sample size. Yes, so this statement absolutely appeals to authority, right? So then the next question, right, that you'd want students to talk about, or the teacher could pose, depending on how you're doing this, would be, why is the science teacher a legitimate authority for this particular claim? All right, and I hope that the connection there is pretty obvious. All right, let's try another one. What claims tester best matches the statement? I've seen so many pictures from spacecrafts that show the earth is round. So is it intuition, authority, evidence, or logic? I could just give like 30 seconds on this one too. Not as clear cut this time, maybe. I should say too that oftentimes, depending on how the claim is written, it will, it will appeal to multiple categories here. It's not necessarily a one-off. All right, yes, I'm going to call this one too. It is evidence, though I could understand, maybe logic here, but the evidence being that you've seen photograph, right? You've seen photographic evidence that show the curvature of the earth. And then our last one, I promise. I just love this one. What claims tester best matches the statement? This feels right because a lot of things I see in nature are round. Is it intuition, authority, and evidence? I'm sorry, intuition, authority, evidence, or logic? All right, it looks like we're all on the same page. This one would definitely appeal to intuition, but again, the follow-up statement would be, is this a good appeal to your intuition? And I'm not so sure that just because I've seen things that are round, that this thing must also too be round is really the greatest claim. But anyway, so thank you so much for participating in this, I admit, a little bit silly thing. But the general idea there too is this claims testing protocol is to get students to think about their own thinking, so that, they can ultimately express better claims in both writing and speaking, right? So if they've done this type of activity and talk with their peers, gotten some teacher feedback on their claims, what they produce will almost certainly be better. All right, so it is almost 4:10 here. I'm going to run through just again the three strategies we've covered here, and then we'll close out. We have a new bank of instructional strategies for social studies. It's on the K-12 social studies landing page on Louisiana Believes that I believe my colleagues have linked in chat a few times. The initial three strategies we've covered today are available now. There are links to graphic organizers, some research that supports those strategies if you don't believe us or just are generally interested on where some of this thinking comes from, along with some grade banded examples and some videos. And I just would want to say that a lot of this work we've done was inspired by some of the work that's been done for the World History OER project. So if you're familiar with that curriculum, you might recognize some of these elements. And yeah, we're happy, no pun intended, to share some of their strategies. So again, hopefully you have some idea about what we mean by this contextualization protocol and when it's a good idea to use it. Same thing with the happy sourcing acronym, right? Just to be clear, there are a lot of different acronyms that float around there to help students source. OPVL, International Baccalaureate stuff, often uses OPVL. They're good. I think that the happy one seems to cover all the necessary bases, and it's an easy to remember acronym, right? And that actually does matter at the end of the day. Okay, and then lastly, this claims testing protocol we went through, which I imagine might be new for a lot of people. So like, when is it a good time to do that? At the end of a unit of study and topic, right? When they're preparing to write something larger or speak to that big framing question. And again, the whole idea is to have them think about their own thinking and ultimately improve their claims. The remaining strategies that we showed on an earlier slide will be posted in this bank here prior to the Teacher Leader Summit. And our summit sessions will be focused on the course frameworks and how they kind of pair and match with this bank of strategies, right? So we're going to have grade banded sessions at Summit where ourselves and some of the amazing Louisiana teachers that helped us work on the frameworks will present a specific topic and how they unit and lesson plan using these two resources we've all made together here. All right, that is going to do us for the end of our presentation for today. If you have additional questions or concerns or even ideas, we would love to hear them. You can contact us at Classroom Support Toolbox at la.gov. And I think, Samantha, we could maybe pause on the recording right now.